disputed by its surrounding countries, but tensions have steadily been increasing in recent years. Controversially, China has claimed most of the territory defined by a 9-dash line and backed this claim by building islands and naval patrols. From Singapore, Karishma Vaswani reports.
The US is here to stay in Asia. That's the message US Defense Secretary James Mattis had for his Asian counterparts in Singapore today. But he also warned of China's increasing influence.
China's militarization of artificial features in the South China Sea includes the deployment of anti-ship missiles, surface-to-air missiles, electronic jammers, and more recently, the landing of bomber aircraft at Woody Island. Despite China's claims to the contrary, the placement of these weapon systems is tied directly to military use for the purposes of intimidation and coercion.
China says it owns all of the South China Sea, a lucrative and strategic shipping zone, even though 6 other countries lay claim to it. It's been building military installations in the area, and critics say Beijing has silenced condemnation of its actions, either by paying off its Asian allies or by bullying them. Allegations China denies.
在南海岛礁驻军和
It's within China's sovereignty to deploy troops and weapons on islands and reefs in the South China Sea, and it's allowed by international law. Anyone who makes carping comments on this is trying to interfere in China's internal affairs. It's not worthy of refuting.
But while the US is keen to assert its leadership in Asia, President Trump's America First policies are sometimes incompatible with those goals. Here in Singapore, security is being stepped up because in just 10 days' time, this city plays host to the summit of the century, the meeting between President Trump and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un. The US has said it's committed to denuclearization and that pulling US troops out of this region isn't on the table. America is positioning itself as a force to be reckoned with in Asia and the superpower its Asian allies should stick to. Karishma Vaswani, BBC News, Singapore.
Well, we can speak now to Laurent Thomé, who is the AFP Beijing Deputy Bureau Chief. Laurent, strong words being used here, coercion, intimidation, and these words being dismissed by China as irresponsible. Talk us through the dynamics at play here.
Well, China, of course, denies all these accusations. For China, it's normal for it to install what it wants on territory that it claims belongs to China. And just today, Chinese General He Lei responded that General Mattis's comments were irresponsible, and that as long as it's your territory, you can deploy whatever you want. For the sake of defending yourself. So for China, they claim that they're taking defensive steps. But of course, for the United States and China's neighbors, it's seen as aggressive measures.
And let's take a step back here, because 6 countries have competing claims in the sea. Why is the South China Sea so contentious?
Well, there is a $5 trillion worth of trade going through the South China Sea. There is oil and gas drilling potential. Vietnam last year began drilling for oil with Spanish firm Repsol, and that caused a controversy with China. So, of course, there is a lot at stake in the region.
And China, they've already got military facilities on the islands.
Right, they have landing strips. Mattis outlined a slew of other hardware that the Chinese have installed, such as anti-ship missiles, surface-to-air missiles, electronic jammers. So all of this can be, of course, very intimidating for China's smaller neighbors, and worrying for the U.S., which is seeing China progressively overtake its influence in the region.
Interesting. Laurent Thomé, AFP Beijing Deputy Bureau Chief, thank you for your time. North Korea's neighbours have welcomed the confirmation that direct talks between the United States and North Korea are back on. Donald Trump has said that the summit with Kim Jong-un will take place as planned in Singapore on June the 12th. More from Howell Griffith in Seoul.
The news that the summit is back on again has been welcomed here in Seoul. A spokesman for the South Korean government saying that they await that moment on June the 12th with excitement. Now, they will also have been reading between the lines in terms of what Donald Trump said in the White House, particularly the idea that this will become a process, that not everything will be done on a deal in Singapore. And vitally, seemed to shy away from the issue of denuclearization and what exactly that would mean, suggesting maybe that the gap between the US's demand for clear, irreversible, verifiable denuclearization is still some way away from what North Korea wants as stage by stage. They will, however, have taken heart from the idea that a peace treaty could be part of the summit, an end officially to the war between North and South. The stalemate has lasted for 65 years. And meanwhile, here in the Korean Peninsula, South has been talking to North. They've had their own talks about cooperation in the future, about economic ties.
Well, let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news. Close allies of the United States have sharply attacked the Trump administration's tariffs on steel and aluminium imports, leaving the US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin completely isolated at the meeting of G7 finance ministers in Canada. Using unusually harsh language, Japan's finance minister said the tariffs were deeply deplorable. Canada and the EU have filed challenges to tariffs with the World Trade Organization. The outbreak of the fatal Nipah virus has entered a new phase in the southern Indian state of Kerala. Officials say 4 patients have now contracted the disease without having had direct contact with the very first cases. The virus is thought to have come originally from animals, including bats. There's currently no vaccine and no known cure for Nipah. A football player in Colombia has been shot dead in the city of Cali. A gunman burst into a house where several players were holding a party and opened fire. Alejandro Peñaranda, who played for the second division club of Cortolua, was killed and another player was injured. Visa has apologised after businesses across Europe were unable to process card payments on Friday. The company says the problems were down to a hardware failure and has reassured customers that the service is now running close to normal again. John McManus reports.
Visa says its high-tech payment system can handle 65,000 transactions a second. But on Friday, that boast fell flat as cardholders in the UK and across Europe found their plastic simply wouldn't work. The problem began in the afternoon, appearing to largely affect electronic payments rather than cash machine withdrawals. Many shoppers took to social media to complain, with the company forced to apologise. These people in Droitwich said it wasn't just customers who were caught out.
You can tell the staff are on tenterhooks. The manager's jumping up and down, and he's being a little bit firm with his staff because they're in a territory they're not used to being in, I think.
I didn't realise until I got to the till point that, people were going through, but it was taking quite a long time to go through. So when it was my turn, my card just kept saying declined. So I had to leave my shopping and go and get some cash out.
There was a couple in front of us and we heard that there were the cash points there, all the cards were staying, and apparently it was all over the world. So I was like panicking. I've just gone to Barclays Bank and just drew some money out and just pay my shopping. But it's embarrassing.
Payment processing through Visa's systems accounts for 1/3 of all UK spending. That could add up to a lot of unhappy customers. By Friday night, the company said their cards were now largely working at normal levels and that the issue was the result of a hardware failure. We have no reason to believe this was associated with any unauthorised access or malicious events. Yet Visa hasn't explained why Europe was hit, but the US, where the company's IT systems are based, wasn't. As a nation, we're using cards more than ever. That's why Friday's events left so many of us frustrated. But experts say it would be wise to have some backup payment options just in case. That's cash to you and me. The UK consumer group Which has warned people to be wary of any emails or phone calls about the Visa problems. They may just be fraudsters trying to use the event to gain your personal details. John McManus, BBC News.
Coming up next is Sport Today. Stay with BBC World News.
This doesn't stop for a second, whether you're investing.
In this episode of Front Row, the BBC's art show, we'll be talking about musical theatre. We'll look at Tina, the musical, a commentary on race and the music industry. And A Clockwork Orange, set to the author's own score. Join me, Mary Beard, on BBC World News.
Catch up with all the latest sports news and results from around the globe, now on BBC World News in Sport Today.